In the tense atmosphere of the federal courtroom, where the law was supposed to be fair and impartial, Judge Marshall Davis entered with a scowl, his sharp, authoritative eyes scanning the room. He was not only known for his harsh rulings, but also for being a staunch anti-Trump figure. Today, he sat on the bench, presiding over a trial that could determine the fate of a man, an entrepreneur named Sterling, accused of tax evasion. But what truly captured everyone's attention was not the defendant. It was the presence of a key witness, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance. The moment Vance stepped into the courtroom, an eerie silence took over. He moved with a composed demeanor, exuding confidence with every step. Without hesitation, he nodded respectfully to the court officials, showing his regard for the justice system he believed in. But the atmosphere was immediately shattered by Judge Davis's sharp voice. "Well, isn't this something special?" Davis smirked, his eyes filled with contempt. "But remember, this isn't the Senate floor. In this courtroom, your title means nothing." The entire courtroom held its breath. A U.S. Vice President, one of the most powerful figures in the nation, had just been openly dismissed by a judge in his own courtroom. But Vance remained unfazed. He responded calmly yet firmly. "Understood, Your Honor. I'm here only to testify to the truth." But the word truth seemed to hit Davis like a heavy blow. He sneered. "Truth?" Davis shook his head, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "We'll see about that." Throughout the trial, Davis displayed blatant bias. He repeatedly interrupted the defense attorneys, refusing to let them present evidence in Sterling's favor. Every time they mentioned the defendant's charitable contributions, Davis would immediately cut them off, slamming his gavel down and barking, "No history lessons needed. I couldn't care less about these phony acts of charity." Each of Davis's words slashed through Sterling's hopes like a blade. But Vance stood firm. When it was his turn, he slowly pulled out documents that could change the course of the trial. "Your Honor, I can confirm Mr. Sterling's financial transparency. The accounting records of the Fed and Family Foundation have been thoroughly audited." But the moment Vance mentioned an important meeting that took place on the 15th of... As Davis's confidence suddenly vanished. His fingers began to tremble, his eyes darting toward a stack of documents on his desk, papers that only he truly understood. The entire courtroom sensed the shift. It was no longer the usual anger, but something else. Unease. Vance stared at Davis, as if he had just uncovered something crucial. "The meeting on the 15th of... Seems like an interesting detail, doesn't it, Your Honor?" Vance asked, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. Davis reacted immediately, but this time the scorn in his voice was gone. In its place was a barely concealed panic. "Those meetings have nothing to do with this case," he snapped, but his tone lacked the certainty it once carried. In that moment, the entire courtroom held its breath. A man who once carried himself as the most powerful figure in the room now appeared unsettled by a witness he had assumed would be easy to control. What Davis didn't realize was that J.D. Vance wasn't just here to testify. He was here to expose the truth that Davis had been desperately trying to hide. The tension in the courtroom grew thicker by the second. Judge Marshall Davis, once seated on the bench with arrogance and absolute authority, now seemed to be losing his grip. Vance, unwavering in his composure, continued to peel back the layers of secrets Davis had long buried. "Your Honor, it seems Liberty Foundation has taken a particular interest in your rulings." A suffocating silence fell over the courtroom. Curious eyes turned toward Davis, who no longer maintained his usual icy expression. His fingers clenched the armrest of his chair, his breathing turning heavy. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Davis snapped. But the usual conviction in his voice was missing. Vance didn't stop. He placed a thick file onto the table. "This is evidence of suspicious payments transferred from Liberty Foundation into your personal account, just days before key rulings that benefited their political donors." Davis's face instantly went pale. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. He stared at the documents, his gaze flickering between rage and fear. "These documents are worthless," Davis shouted. "I will not accept them as evidence." But no one in the courtroom believed him anymore. They could see the rising panic in every action, every word Davis uttered. He was no longer the powerful judge who could manipulate justice at will. Now he was just a desperate man unraveling as the truth came to light. Vance remained composed, his sharp eyes as if he had anticipated Davis's reaction. He continued flipping through the case files, pointing at each suspicious transaction. "These are the funds transferred into your offshore accounts immediately after you handed down unfair rulings against conservative defendants." This time, Davis nearly jumped from his seat. "Enough! I won't allow you to continue." He slammed his gavel down, but the authority he once commanded was gone. The tension in the courtroom tightened to a suffocating level. The court staff exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to act. Vance remained unfazed. He continued, "And more importantly, we have testimonies from those you coerced into destroying evidence. Your Honor, even your court clerk was pressured into covering up the truth." A small sob suddenly broke the silence. All eyes turned to Davis's clerk, a young woman sitting with her head bowed, her hands trembling. Davis whipped his head toward her, his gaze burning with intimidation. But this time, his threats no longer held power. "He forced me," she cried, her voice shaky yet filled with despair. "He threatened to ruin my career if I didn't destroy documents that could have helped the defendants." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Davis glared at his clerk, then turned to Vance, his face flushed with a mix of anger and fear. "Who the hell do you think you are to come here and humiliate me?" Davis bellowed, his voice exploding like a cornered beast. But Vance merely gave a faint smile. "I'm not humiliating you, Your Honor," he said, his gaze cold. "I'm simply letting the truth speak for itself." Davis completely lost control. In a fit of rage, he slammed the gavel down again and shouted at the security officers, "Arrest him immediately! He's in contempt of court!" But no one moved. The court officers, who had once bowed to Davis's authority, now stood still, their eyes filled with doubt and hesitation. They realized Davis was no longer an honorable judge. He was just a corrupt man desperately trying to save himself. A heavy silence loomed. Then something unprecedented happened. Davis's absolute power had crumbled, and he knew it. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Vance's accusations had pushed Judge Marvel Davis to the brink of ruin. He trembled, struggling to maintain control, but the fear was evident on his face. Suddenly, the courtroom doors swung open. Every head turned toward the entrance. A team of FBI agents stepped in, their suits crisp, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Leading them was a tall agent, his piercing eyes scanning the room before making a firm declaration. "Judge Marvel Davis, you are under federal investigation. You are to remain in your seat." The air in the room turned ice cold. Davis's mouth fell open, his face instantly pale. He looked around, searching for an escape, for some kind of salvation, but all he found were stunned faces from those who once feared him. "You can't do this!" Davis shouted, his voice now filled with desperation instead of authority. "I'm a federal judge! I have immunity! This is a conspiracy by the conservatives!" The FBI agents remained unfazed by his panicked defense. "Mr. Davis, we have undeniable evidence," the lead agent continued. "Transactions from Liberty Foundation, illicit financial dealings, secret meetings with special interest groups. It has all been exposed. The justice system is not a weapon for your personal gain." His words struck like a gavel of truth, condemning the man who had manipulated the law for far too long. Davis was panicked, sweat beading on his forehead. He turned to the security officers, making one last desperate attempt to assert his authority. "Arrest him! Stop this right now! This is a coup by the conservatives." But no one moved. The very people who had once obeyed his every command, the courtroom security officers, now stood motionless, watching him with doubt in their eyes. They had seen the corruption rotting the system they once trusted. They had realized justice was no longer in Davis's hands. Seeing that no one stood with him, Davis began to unravel. He thrashed, his voice rising with both fury and terror. "You don't understand. I have connections. I have people to protect me. If I fall, others will drag you down with me." But no one paid attention to the threat. A loud click rang through the air. The FBI agents stepped forward, twisted David's arms behind his back, and cuffed him. The cold feeling of metal pressed against his wrists was a harsh reality that David never thought he would have to face. In that moment, the entire courtroom exploded in shock. A federal judge, who once had the power of life and death in this courtroom, was now being led away like a criminal by the very people who enforced justice. As he was led out, David still hadn't given up. He turned his head to look back at the courtroom, his eyes filled with hatred and bitterness. "Do you think this will change anything?" he shouted. "There will always be people like me. You can't stop all of us." The courtroom fell silent. Then, in the silence, Jevon stepped forward. He did not look at David with anger or hatred, only a calm, unshakable determination. "You're right, Judge," Van replied, his voice low but strong. "There will always be those who abuse power, but there will always be those who dare to stand up to corruption. That's why justice will always prevail." The words echoed through the courtroom like a declaration of truth, of justice. David stiffened. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say in response. When the courtroom door closed behind David, the powerful judge was no longer there, only a fallen man, judged by the very system of justice he had manipulated. Inside the courtroom, a new chapter of justice was unfolding. Judge Marvel David's arrest in the middle of the trial was not only a memorable moment, but also a death knell for a justice system that had been exposed to corruption and abuse of power. News of the incident spread like wildfire in the dark night, shaking not only the legal community, but also the entire society. A powerful judge, who once stood proudly on the bench, was now turned against the very system he had once manipulated. But what was more remarkable was that David was not the only one in the dark. Immediately after his arrest, a large-scale investigation was launched, leading to a series of other arrests. Judges who had accepted bribes to give biased verdicts, prosecutors who turned a blind eye to justice, the forces behind the scenes pulling the strings of the justice system, all were exposed to the light. Each link in the seemingly impregnable web of corruption began to crumble. Powerful names, once hidden in the shadows, now step into the light as defendants. Then another news broke. The case against Sterling was dismissed. The evidence that David had deliberately distorted, the documents that had been hidden for years, were finally brought to the public. A new judge, untainted by corruption and prejudice, reviewed the case with impartiality. Sterling was vindicated. He was no longer a victim of an unjust system. He became a symbol of those who had been trampled by abuse of power, but never lost faith in justice. The impact of this event was not limited to one court or one person. It became a wave, a wake-up call for the entire system. The public began to speak out, demanding transparency and true fairness in the judiciary. Those who had abused their power to manipulate the law now had to face the consequences. No more courtrooms where justice is sold. No more judges sitting on high dais, passing judgment on people's fates based on personal interests. And in the midst of it all, the image of J.D. Vance standing firm in the middle of the courtroom that day remains vivid in everyone's mind. He didn't need flowery words. He didn't need to raise a banner. He just let the truth speak. And the truth prevailed. Ultimately, this story is not just about a corrupt judge or a wrongful conviction. It is about the most important thing any system must uphold, justice. Justice does not belong to those who seek to control it, nor is it a tool for the powerful. It belongs to those who dare to stand up for it, those who refuse to bow to injustice, those who are willing to fight to uphold the truth. And that is why, no matter how many people like David appear in the future, there will always be people like Van, like Sterling, people who never let justice be forgotten. If you believe that justice must be protected, if you believe that the truth always prevails, please click like to spread this message to more people. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any inspiring stories about the fight against corruption, protecting justice and truth. Let's work together to create a fairer, more transparent society where the law is not a tool of the powerful but a shield that protects all citizens. Thank you for watching this inspiring story. If you find it meaningful and want to spread this message to more people, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories. Click like if this content touches your heart, and comment below with your feelings. We would love to hear your thoughts. Please share this video to spread the message of empathy and compassion. See you in the next videos, where we will continue to explore inspiring and meaningful stories.